Good morning. This is Mission Control Houston bringing you live coverage this morning of the berthing of Cygnus to the Unity module on the International Space Station. Earlier this morning, Cygnus was captured at 3:05 a.m. Central by NASA astronaut Drew Morgan, backed up by Jessica Meir of NASA, using the Canadarm2 robotic arm. After capture of the spacecraft, controls of the robotic arm were handed over to teams on the ground who brought the spacecraft closer to the station and repositioned it, ready for Cygnus berthing with the common berthing mechanism on the Earth-facing side of the space station's Unity module. Cygnus is now moments away from being bolted into place. There are two stages that will happen today as part of the berthing process. The first stage is a series of 4 locks and latches, and the second stage is a series of 16 bolts that will be driven, all to make sure Cygnus is secured to the station before the hatch is opened to unload the cargo later today. Again, once Cygnus is attached to the International Space Station, the crew will enter the vehicle later today to begin unloading nearly 7,500 pounds of cargo from Cygnus. Again, Cygnus is currently in its berthing position and ready for first and second stage berthing to begin soon. This is a live view from the common berthing mechanism. Again, Cygnus is now moments away from being bolted into place. The International Space Station and Cygnus are now flying 263 statute miles above the Indian Ocean. And we have confirmation that the first stage is complete. We'll now move on to second stage capture. The Canadarm is now confirmed limp, which sets up the second stage for capture to begin here shortly. That second stage will be the driving of 16 bolts to secure Cygnus to the International Space Station. Again, those 16 bolts are currently driving, and once they're tightened and complete, the berthing of Cygnus to the International Space Station will be complete. Just to recap so far, first stage capture was a series of 4 locks and latches, which is now complete. We're now standing by for second stage capture, which is a series of 16 bolts that are now being driven. Still standing by for those 16 bolts to be driven, which will further secure the Cygnus spacecraft to the International Space Station. Again, those are still being driven, and once they're tightened and complete, the berthing of Cygnus to the International Space Station will be complete.
Sensation on 2 for leak check prep.
Go ahead on 2.
Stephen, just looking if I have a go to start that next activity a little early and whether or not step 1.1 embedded RFID readers are off.
Jessica, we can confirm step 1.1 is good, safing's in place.
Okay, thank you.
Sensation on 2 for timeline.
Go ahead, Drew.
Stephen, this is just a soft ask. If there's any possibility that the CBCS camera could be removed earlier, I'd be happy to do it earlier.
And Drew, we're going to put some safing in place, and then we'll call you back with the go.
That sounds great.
Again, we're standing by for those 16 bolts to be driven, which will further secure the Cygnus spacecraft to the International Space Station. Those bolts are still driving, and once they're tightened and complete, the berthing of Cygnus to the International Space Station will be complete. And we have confirmation that second stage berthing is complete. Cygnus is now fully attached to the International Space Station, which happened at 5:16 a.m. Central Time, as the International Space Station and Cygnus were flying south of New Zealand. I know.
Station Houston, Space to Ground 2 for timeline. All right, first thing is CBM A bolts are complete. Cygnus is structurally attached, and therefore the no exercise constraint is complete. Overall, we're about an hour ahead on the timeline. There's no pressure to start anything early, but if you want to take midday meal early, we could start the afternoon activities. And with that, the CBCS safing is complete, so you're go to remove that camera whenever you're ready.
Okay, Stephen, thanks for the update. Copy all. I will do the CBCS, and then we'll get back to you and see how we'll change the day, whether we'll attack anything early.
Yep, sounds good.
And that'll conclude Cygnus's journey to the International Space Station, which began on Saturday, February 15th at 2:21 p.m. Central, when it launched from Pad 0A at NASA's Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia. At the time of launch, the International Space Station was flying 258 statute miles over the western Pacific. Cygnus was captured this morning at 3:05 a.m. Central Time by NASA astronaut Drew Morgan at the controls of the station's robotic arm, backed up by Jessica Meir of NASA, as the station and Cygnus were flying 265 statute miles above southeastern Russia. After capture of the spacecraft, controls of the robotic arm were handed over to teams here on the ground who brought the spacecraft into the station and readied it for berthing, which took place on the Earth-facing side of the Unity module on the International Space Station at 5:16 a.m. Central Time, as the International Space Station and Cygnus were flying south of New Zealand. After a series of leak checks later today, the crew will enter Cygnus later to begin unloading its contents, consisting of about 7,500 pounds of science, research, crew supplies, and vehicle hardware. Cygnus will spend about 3 months attached to the space station until May 11th, and will then depart the station to perform its secondary mission objectives before it disposes of several tons of trash from the station during a fiery re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere on May 25th. The Cygnus spacecraft for this resupply mission was dedicated to U.S. Air Force Major Robert Lawrence, who was the first African-American astronaut selected by any program specifically chosen for the Air Force's Manned Orbital Laboratory program in June of 1967. With the Robert Lawrence successfully berthed to the International Space Station, that'll wrap up our coverage this morning. This is Mission Control Houston.